This is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube. This is a clip from the interview with George Knapp and Colm Kelleher of Bigelow Aerospace on the Engaging the Phenomenon podcast. The links to the full podcast are in the description. These are clips mixed together of two different podcasts that they did with Engaging the Phenomenon, talking about the paranormal connection to UAPs, which they even go into this saying that you want to be kind of as professional as possible looking at these things from a scientific point of view, but there is kind of an otherworldly aspect of the UAP phenomenon that, as crazy as it sounds, it appears to be part of the phenomenon. They discuss it in this, and they also discuss something interesting that I often think of. The Navy has been not open, but they've been discussing the UAP phenomenon more in recent years than the Air Force. And they talk a little bit about why the Air Force is staying out of these congressional hearings and these Senate hearings that have been happening recently related to UAPs, where you would think the Air Force, if any division of the Army, might have more connections with them. But the Navy, not only is it connected because a lot of them seem to be going in and out of water, but obviously there's Navy jets in the air as well. But very good discussion here. Let's get into it. And the host of the Engaging the Phenomenon podcast will be doing an interview with me tomorrow night, Thursday, January 9th, right here on the Hannibal TV. So please subscribe.
OSAP, the program that we're probably going to talk about today, that was a UFO and paranormal study investigation operated under the Defense Intelligence Agency. Because of that group that Bigelow had put together, NIDS, and the relationships that were established there with not only the Science Advisory Board, but with Harry Reid and Bob Bigelow, it led to all kinds of things that we're going to get into today, including the discussion of Skinwalker Ranch. That same year that NIDS launched, 1996, Bigelow had heard about this property in Utah where strange things were happening. There had been a couple of little local newspaper articles that were picked up by the wire services. The property came to his attention. He and I think John Alexander flew down to meet with the rancher, and the primary interest was UFOs. The Uinta Basin is a place that had been known for UFO activity for decades, maybe even much longer than that. And that's really what got Bigelow's attention. If there's this haunted ranch where UFOs are being seen on a regular basis in a fairly spectacular fashion, he was interested. So he flew down, not really knowing the full scope and depth and breadth of the strange phenomena that have been happening on that property and throughout the basin. But he met with the rancher, bought the property on the day that he got there. And then for the next 7.5 years, he had a team there, the NIDS team, including Colm, Eric Davis, folks like that, who were on the ground, boots on the ground, 24/7 for long stretches of time. They put in cameras, they did scientific studies, they tried to look for prosaic explanations for strange phenomena. They interviewed the family, the neighbors, the cops, the Indians. They did a real thorough job of trying to figure out this strange stuff that was going on. The longer they were there, the stranger it got. And that study had been kept quiet. They were there for 7.5 years. I was basically the only journalist allowed to know what NIDS was doing, but I couldn't report on it. So I would bug people like my good friend Colm about letting me go ahead and cut loose with some of this information. And eventually he talked Robert Bigelow into letting me do something. My first visits to the property were, I brought a cameraman along. We were going to produce a documentary, a film about the strange stuff. So we started doing interviews. Bigelow eventually changed his mind about that, killed the idea for the documentary. So all that footage that I had over those first couple of years, from 2001 through 2004 or 5, was spiked. But the activity level for NIDS kind of went down. Whatever that phenomena was, this intelligence at the ranch, and we can get into specifics in a moment, sort of went underground. It got tired of being hunted. So there wasn't enough really activity to keep NIDS busy. And I think Bigelow was ready to shut the whole thing down. Not sell the property, but shut it down. I argued that, well, look, let me write something about it, put something out, and maybe you could get ideas on where there are other hotspots that NIDS could investigate, which is what happened.
Colm, please add context to that, or as far as you
Well,
can approach that.
as we know, the National Defense Authorization Act was recently signed, but that the real kicker for this is the appropriations legislation that needs to go through. And so a lot will depend on how much funding is allocated to this program. And that right now is really up in the air. I mean, I would say that once if there are sort of bona fide authorization programs that are passed and the president signs, then I will be an awful lot more confident in all of this language having teeth, because I think there's so much up in the air, and there's also a tremendous level of pushback against these programs seeing the light of day. So I'm basically an optimist, and I would say maybe there's enough momentum in order to make this happen. But right now, I think the jury is still out.
I'll add this. The Pentagon will have to be dragged kicking and screaming into coming up and coming clean on this stuff. They are already dragging their feet, as Colm has pointed out, and as others have pointed out. They don't want to give this stuff up. That ridiculous event Friday with a couple of noted debunker media types, it flies in the face of what they're saying. The word salad they're tossing out about wanting transparency. If not for the New York Times story 5 years ago, making it acceptable for other mainstream media to go ahead and dig into this, Congress would not have come out of its closet and embraced this topic as it has. New York Times story made it acceptable for other media to cover it. That gave cover to members of Congress to ask questions, to have closed door briefings. It's important for the public, James, for your audience to stay engaged, to keep the feet to the fire of members of Congress, because something else comes along, some big issue that distracts them. If they don't stay on this, the military is all too happy to drop it. They don't want this stuff to come out. They don't want to answer questions about it. You look at the evidence of the Air Force. Where have they been? We know they're a storehouse of information and evidence and videos and other kinds of materials over the decades. And they're completely silent on this. We don't hear anything from them unless Congress makes them come to the table. It's not going to happen. So it's important for the public to stay engaged, to keep Congress's feet to the fire, because otherwise the military will happily let this drop.
Yeah, and also I should add that Secretary of the Air Force Frank Kendall came out several months ago and basically said, until we, the Air Force, see some evidence that there is a there, we're not going to expend an awful lot of energy on this whole new initiative. So we already know that the Air Force has a tremendous amount of information and legacy information also. So for the Secretary of the Air Force to draw a line in the sand like that a few months ago just shows me, for example, that there will be quite a lot of resistance in bringing this out of the darkness into the light. So the Air Force is a very, very, very powerful element of this whole thing. The other part of this is the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. And during the OSAP program, we had a lot of information that was going on with OUSDI in terms of how recalcitrant they were and how completely opposite they wanted in terms of information getting forward. So we have both OUSDI and S now, as well as the Air Force. We have two very powerful 800-pound gorillas in this equation, and we have to surmount that whole thing in order for this to happen.
You are both close colleagues with one of my friends, Dr. Eric Davis, and we all know about the Wilson Davis memo, the meeting that happened in Las Vegas in 2002. When was the first time that you guys had heard about that meeting, and when was the first time that you actually read the actual memo?
I'm gonna let Colin take that one.
When's the first Colin, the first time that you heard about the meeting and the first time that you read the actual 15 pages of the memo?
I was aware of it many, many years ago, but I can't put a date on it. I was aware, but most of what happened with the Wilson Davis memo happened after Eric Davis left National Institute for Discovery Science. And so, I mean, we're all part of a quote unquote invisible college. So there is a lot of information transfer that is highly confidential between different members of this quote unquote invisible college. So I can say that I was aware, but I'm not going to say any more than that.
George?
Well, I'll say a little bit more than that. I was aware of it too, not that long after it happened, and I did not read the memo. I didn't see it until years later, but that discussion floated around. Eric had left NIDS, I think, 4 or 5 months prior, but he was still working for Hal Puthoff. That was still a pretty close group of people. They all were they had been through the fire together and trying to figure this mystery out. So there is a flow of information that maintains for that group and a little bit larger group, regardless of where they're working and who they're working for. So that story had been out. And I'll just tell you, I think I'm pretty sure that the meeting really did happen. That was discussed among a very small circle of friends, that it was real, that Eric's notes were accurate, that he really did meet with Wilson, and that I know where it happened, and I think it's real. It's true. Eric didn't make it up. It's not a movie script. It's real. The fact that it leaked out after Dr. Edgar Mitchell died is unfortunate, but it happens.
Well, I mean, unfortunate or not, I mean, it made it into the congressional record now. You can go on the congressional website and it has the 15 pages with Dr. Eric Davis and Vice Admiral Tom Wilson, who was the deputy director of the DIA, went on to be the director of the DIA after he behaved and stopped asking questions about it, presumably, even though if you take into the notes that he was threatened if he continued to pursue the issue. And I can understand why he would not want to publicly vouch for that meeting for legal and safety reasons. So, God bless the guy. But in relation to that, in those same set of documents that were released from Edgar Mitchell's files after he had passed away, there was also an email thread with Kit Green, Hal Puthoff, and others regarding an alien autopsy video. And, I mean, there was things in that thing that were way more interesting than the Santilli film. You have Dr. Kit Green saying that he was briefed in the Pentagon 3 times in the late 90s and shown pictures of autopsies by people in the Pentagon. How, I don't understand how that is not like picked up on. That's incredible, number one. And I don't know if you probably can't speak to any of that, but George, I want to start with you here. In that email thread, there's something mentioned by Dr. Hal Puthoff about a group called Zodiac. Have you ever heard of it?
Yes, I've heard of it. I'm just not ready to go into that, though. Yeah, I've heard of it. I think it's real. But I'm not able to talk about it right now.
I know you can't really get into it, but could you offer any context to the audience listening of your understanding of what it might be?
Well, sort of something akin to MJ12, an idea that we had of what MJ12 would be. And those documents are highly controversial even now. Whether or not it really existed is unknown. This is a similar sort of an organization that's been described in high levels of UFO lore for a long time. If I had to give an opinion about whether it's real, I'd say, yeah, I think it's real.
And Colm, can you say anything about Zodiac?
Beyond what George has said, no. I think George summarized it really well.
And George, and again, I don't, whether you can answer or not, do you think that that is an actual name of a program or group, or is that something used as a cover?
Yeah, I suspect it's not an official name. I don't think it's going to pop up in a document somewhere. I think it's kind of a loose sort of an unofficial name for a group and an organization. But I could be wrong. I mean, I'm not a member. They don't let me in. So maybe I'd like to. Colm, put in a good word for me.
So, and in regards to that, and we're talking about informal names of groups, and I wanted to touch on who killed OSAP, and within those kind of conversations, you hear the name. Another informal name that's not an actual name of a program is the Collins Elite. So, was that something that was that people were aware of during OSAP?
I can say that during the OSAP and in the aftermath of OSAP, there were several people that were involved that were looking to a different organization from the Defense Intelligence Agency in order for Senator Reid to execute a separate program. And during those events, there was multiple times when there were various interferences that were put out, and they were tied to this so-called Collins Elite. Some of the people who were trying to interfere with the creation of a new program did have those affiliations with what was loosely termed the Collins Elite. And so there were elements within various parts of the Pentagon that were tied to various religious beliefs that were interfering deliberately in the furtherance of what OSAP had started and what OSAP was hoping to continue.
I'd add this, James, is that the idea, when I first heard the idea that people were objecting to continuation of OSAP or studying UFOs and places like Skinwalker Ranch, that they objected to it on religious grounds. They wanted the program killed because they felt the phenomena itself was demonic or satanic. I thought that was preposterous. What an outrageous thing to say. If you're a high up in the Pentagon or these intelligence agencies, you're basing national defense policy on your religious beliefs. It's outrageous. And as time has gone on, I've thought about it a little bit more, and we don't really know what the phenomena at the ranch is. And, to suggest that we don't know that it's alien or interdimensionals or extraterrestrial or crypto-terrestrial or whatever it is, can't really rule demonic out, So looking in retrospect to the concerns that these guys had, maybe they weren't all that far off the mark. The fact is, though, that whatever the source of the phenomena is, whatever the nature of it is, not studying it is not a good way to make it go away. Trying to ignore it doesn't mean it no longer exists. What these guys at OSAP did was remarkable. I mean, they had tremendous courage to go ahead and follow the evidence wherever it led. And yeah, now, after all these years after their program was disbanded, it is now somewhat respectable to go ahead and investigate UFOs, hardware, craft from other worlds, whatever it is. It's acceptable for media to report on it, acceptable for Congress to talk about it. But good gosh, don't talk about anything any weirder. You don't want to get into paranormal, poltergeist type stuff like what they saw at the ranch, or Bigfoot, or creatures, or the hitchhiker phenomena following intelligence agents home and messing with their families. That's too weird. We can't study it. I can understand that when the evidence from OSAP, when these reports from BAS started going to the DIA and they circulate a little bit, that it would be very upsetting to these intelligence professionals, that they'd wonder, holy crap, what if this ends up on the front page of the New York Times? We'll be terribly embarrassed. We got to knock this off before it becomes a scandal. Well, yeah, it's scary to investigate it. These guys had the courage to go ahead and, as I said, follow the evidence where it led. You can't just solve this mystery about UFOs by studying lights in the sky. I was thinking about it. It's like I'm playing with my cats with a laser pointer. They never quite catch up to it. That's how UFO people are going to be if all they're doing is chasing lights in the sky and radar returns and things of that sort. You're never going to figure it out unless you look at the big picture, which is what OSAP was doing. If they'd been allowed to continue, we might have had some answers by now.
You can't separate the two. You can't separate UFOs from paranormal. It might be convenient to do that. And I know that the kinds of cases that we explored in the first book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, make people uncomfortable. How do you think Colm Kelleher, Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis, all of them with PhDs attached to their names, how do you think they feel about investigating what seems like poltergeist type effects associated with UFOs or cryptid creatures? They're not crazy about that. That's not a career builder. It's not something you are comfortable with, but you have to follow the evidence where it leads. And the fact is, that stuff has always been associated with UFOs. Ufologists don't like it. We don't like to mix in woo with our flying saucers. We want them to be pristine in their own category. These are craft from another planet and they're visiting us and that's it. Well, that's not how it works. And you are never going to solve this mystery by merely looking at lights in the sky and radar returns. You have to go talk to the people who have the close encounters. You have to have the information and evidence from those who are affected by these encounters. That's what these guys did. It takes guts to do it, to follow the evidence where it leads. But gosh, you can't make a judgment going into a program like OSAP and say, yeah, we're just going to discard anything that's too weird because we don't want to upset people at the Pentagon, or we want to skew the results so people will take us more seriously. You follow the evidence where it leads. And it led to some weird stuff. We're not ashamed about that. We're glad that it got as much attention as it did. And we're glad it makes people uncomfortable because the topic is uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I can attest to that firsthand because I've had many encounters, I've had the experiences, and I've tried to trace that back with like a level-headed approach and try to detach myself from it and not believe and even maybe say what the UFO phenomenon is trying to push on any kind of experiencer, right? Because there's a whole perception management, not just from let's say the U.S. government side, but also from the phenomenon side, right? There's narratives that are interwoven into some of these experiences. Did you guys encounter any of that in OSAP at all?
You're talking about narratives being woven into the UFO experience in terms of manipulation of perception. If that is the case, we certainly did encounter that. We had one classic case of where we had a number of Defense Intelligence Agency people who had been deployed to Skinwalker Ranch for the purposes of corroborating, all of these reports that were out there, and the DIA people were saying, are these people making this stuff up? We need to go to the property, do a field research project, and find out whether or not this is just being sort of somebody's fantasy. So the number of people over the course of the project were deployed on the ranch. So on one such occasion, we had about 5 or 6 people, among whom were the DIA people, on the property. They all were equipped with Generation 3 night vision binoculars. So suddenly, and this was like at night, so suddenly from behind Skinwalker Ridge, which is the northern border of the property, this really bright light popped up from behind the ridge. So everybody saw it, and everybody was equipped with Generation 3 night vision binoculars. So the first thing they did was everybody, activated the binoculars and started looking at this object. So we had a debriefing session afterwards, and it turned out that every single person looking through the night vision binoculars at this object saw something different. They were reporting something different. Some people reported like a large square object. Some people reported circular object, triangular object. So everybody reported something different. So, people who did not have night vision binoculars were looking at just a light that popped up from behind Skinwalker Ridge. And then we have a constant, exactly the same type of equipment was being used by each person, basic light amplification technology. So they all saw something different. One of the hypotheses we had was that everybody saw something different because everybody was meant to see something different. And so, you know, it could be that some kind of management of perception was going on during that particular incident.
I'd add this, James. You know, the first book that Colm and I worked on was about the ranch, Hunt for the Skinwalker. Skinwalker is sort of the blanket term. It's kind of a metaphor that the Native Americans used to explain all the strange phenomena they had seen on that property and in that Uinta Basin for decades, maybe centuries. It takes on different forms. It's never quite the same in two different instances. And that's sort of a metaphor for the UFO mystery as well. These things change shapes. I mean, why do we have 500 different kinds of flying saucers, different models? Do they really have the variety pack coming here, or did they change shapes? We know there are cases where they're one big object that splits into multiple objects, or they fuse back together. They change shapes. They disappear before our eyes. They give us glimpses of what they allow us to see, but we really have no idea what they genuinely look like. They are shapeshifters, both the craft that change shapes and the beings that have been reported. There is a perception management on the part of whatever this non-human intelligence is, and we don't understand it yet, you know, but it's pretty clear it takes on whatever form it feels like showing us.